having some difficulty figuring out what's going on at Lucasfilm. They've got 2 tracks of Star Wars movies happening, and when they started out, the original pitch was that the main series was going to remain the safe, big-ticket, holding to the original tone track, and the side story spin-off installments were going to be where things got all experimental and offbeat. But so far, the 2 spin-offs have been micromanaged to the point where they're changing directors after the fact, allegedly for being too out there with their take on as safe and banal a pitch as young Han Solo. But now the second main series movie, apparently they let a weirdo indie auteur guy hand in easily the most divisive and different Star Wars movie since The Empire Strikes Back, and they were totally cool with it and behind his vision. I mean, I'm glad they did, because I thought the movie was terrific, and in terms of the franchise, probably the best of these things anyone has made since the original 3. It's just, you know, an odd situation. It's like if the Marvel Netflix shows were all strictly managed PG-13 formula adherent ventures that were just constantly paying off plot threads from the Avengers movies, but then when Infinity War came out, they were all like, hey, guess what? Pepper's been a ghost this whole time, and Captain America's gay now. Not that that last one would be a problem somehow, it'd just be, you know, unexpected. Either way, I like the fact that this is a divisive movie that's generating discussion. If indeed Western democracy's destiny is to see its institutions devastated by disastrously stupid electoral decisions and replaced by the rise of a global corporate technocracy overseen by a multimedia entertainment conglomerate with a no longer all that unusual preoccupation with futurist urban planning, let's at least let the masses have opiates worth talking about. However, as with anything divisive, there's always the unfortunate side effect of a vocal minority deciding to hate it for stupid reasons.
The fact of the matter is that Star Wars has been ruined forever by the estrogenical machinations of the SJW gynocracy, who've aligned to demasculate white civilization into a state of thoroughly cocked soy boy serfdom on behalf of the globalist Jew-authoritarian agenda by using cultural Marxism to postmodernize the iconic virility of Luke Skywalker. Hashtag spirit cooking, find me on Gab, remember to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget we'll be streaming Vintage Amiga Roguelike on the Twitch channel later with Augustus Plagueis and Lib Trumper 14H.
Making it impossible to have civilized conversations about it because those with reasonable criticisms of the by no means perfect film often get unfairly, but also somewhat understandably, lumped in with the assholes. And that's unfortunate because even though I'm on the it's good side, the mechanics of how its qualities actually work are a lot more interesting to look into and explore than the insidious time sink of explaining why Laura Dern's hair color has nothing to do with the Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, or chemtrail. Case in point, I'd like to talk about Luke Skywalker. Because what's happening with Luke in The Last Jedi is goddamn fascinating to me, and I'd contend that I'd feel that way even if I didn't think it was the correct decision from a narrative standpoint, which I do. I get why some people don't like it, even as I don't think there's anything they could have done that someone wouldn't have hated. After all, depicting a beloved pop culture hero figure in their old age, having become a reclusive, self-loathing, scruffy burnout tormented by vaguely defined past failings and cruelly dismissing our affection for his prior adventures as we remember them, until being bullied into surrogate fatherhood by a young girl framed by the narrative as the heir apparent to his legacy, leading inexorably to a final act of redemptive self-sacrifice to inspire the desperate inheritors of the cause that turns out he still believed in after all. Who would want to watch that movie? But what I don't quite get as much is the idea that the now canonical version of Old Man Luke as presented in The Last Jedi somehow comes out of left field or doesn't fit with his characterization elsewhere in the lore. I do get people just flat out not digging it. I mean, it's kind of because we're not supposed to like it. Like, we all get that conceptually, right? You're supposed to think he looks like a weird vagrant and that the walrus milk thing is gross and that he's being a total asshole about refusing to use the Force and continue being a hero and that this whole routine is an abject betrayal of his past legacy because it is. Those things are true. We're meant to be disappointed by this being Luke Skywalker because our point of view character in this part of the story is Rey, and her whole journey in this movie is about grappling with overcoming disappointment. It's kind of a show don't tell the characterization via drawing the audience into the individual narrative thing. You know, like if you introduced a new character who seems to be comprised almost entirely of personality traits and visual signifiers designed to make them immediately disliked and suspicious without any concrete rationale for why among a perceived largest segment of the franchise and or genre audience in order to get them into the same headspace as another POV character because their journey is all about recognizing they were wrong to be suspicious and jump to conclusions regarding this person. But anyway, yes, the film takes a definite risk in deciding that the post-Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker comes to a tragic ending, pretty much winding up like both of his masters did instead of breaking the whole Fallen Jedi cycle, and it's a risk precisely because you're gambling that your ultimate payoff is going to be worth deliberate short-term disappointment, and not everyone is going to agree that it is. I very much did in this case, but I've also never quite understood why so many fans seem to want post-Episode 6 Luke to turn into Jedi Clint Eastwood in the first place, so...
Actually, there's a funny story behind that. You're gonna love this. True story.
I mean, one of the underappreciated things about Star Wars as a movie franchise is that it consistently avoids having generic, gritty, hard-bitten, badass sci-fi fantasy guy be the protagonist pretty much ever, and it's kind of deliberate about that, reflecting George Lucas' very 1970s LA college dude perspective on things that informed the foundations of the property. Luke in the original trilogy is a starry-eyed kid who eventually grows up into something like a turned-on, new-agey Shaolin monk/Unitarian youth minister, which is why it makes even more sense that his final form is basically a burned-out aging hippie. I mean, have you ever met baby boomers who didn't make it out to the suburbs and become Republicans and/or your parents? Exactly. Then in the prequels, you get young Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, who are both different variations on the whole aforementioned idealized 70s style, spiritually centered, super chill guy warrior monk angle, and then there's Anakin, who's, well, at first he's Anakin, bleeding heart, hyper-emotional, romantic guy. Incidentally, say what you will about the writing, holy shit, George Lucas was spot the fuck on as to what the base model of what early 21st century youth fiction male protagonists were going to be, and then the closer he gets to being battle-scarred, hardened badass guy is also the closer he gets to being evil cyborg dark wizard guy. And now we've got Rey, who's obviously not that guy, Finn, who's so far more like the unlikely working-class hero guy, and Poe, who thinks he's that guy, but is clearly meant for different, better things, which his space moms are going to make him understand if they have to sprout wings and fly to do it. The closest we get to that guy is Han, who's rather pointedly kind of a fuck-up, getting by on charm and luck, and Jyn Erso, who honestly herself is as close as a main Star Wars protagonist has ever gotten to being that guy, save for one rather large and noticeable difference. This is one of the cool, unique things about Star Wars. There's no Flash Gordon, there's no John Carter, there's no Buck Rogers here. That guy isn't a thing in Star Wars, and yet so often the spin-offs and extended legend whatever stuff always seems to want to bring that kind of boring that guy protagonist in anyway, either by having Luke get there post-Return of the Jedi, or by inventing dull dudes like Dash Rendar or Starkiller, and I just don't get the appeal, basically. From where I sit, Luke Skywalker's story arc going from farm boy to war hero to post-war disillusionment to the space version of a soldier who didn't quite make it back from the war in the psychological sense, moving to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, it just feels appropriately Star Wars to me, especially, though not exclusively, because you can't detach the original trilogy's complicated view of war and warfighting from the effect that Vietnam had on men of George Lucas and Mark Hamill's generation. As does the mini-redemption arc that follows, and is also the point of all this, but we'll come back to that at a later point and/or date.
Don't fuck with the Jedi Master, son.
In any case, the actual most controversial thing about Luke in The Last Jedi is, of course, the revelation about where Kylo Ren went bad, i.e. Luke sensing the dark side in Ben Solo and momentarily thinking about solving the problem preemptively exactly long enough to make him turn. That's pretty dark, no two ways about it. It needs to be, because the point of the larger story here is that Luke had given up on the Force and all things therein associated because he did something he can't forgive himself for, which he more or less correctly blames on his own hubris about buying into his own mythology. Narratively, that all fits, and for me at least it works because Mark Hamill really showed up to play and he sells the crap out of it. Seriously, at least 90% of this very difficult character work I'm describing here pays off because Mark Hamill is, and always has been, a really gifted performer when he commits to a part. And I can't not sympathize with anyone for whom this is a bridge too far. I mean, I disagree, but I get it. This is about the darkest turn they could have taken to explain how this all went down. Like, Luke going to the dark side would be one thing, because the dark side is kind of cool and we've seen hints of what it could be before, but Luke even thinking about going way, way past bad to prevent bad and winding up in weird moral limbo that maybe creates a new Vader is way up there with Anakin genociding the Tusken Raiders and killing off the younglings in terms of going as dark as Star Wars generally wants to go. And I get that for apparently a lot of people, they just didn't want that to be Luke's story, so that's where they break off on this entirely, or they merely resent the broader Luke needs to be tucked back into the fight story arc with Rey because making that happen necessitates that super dark backstory. Speaking for myself though, I'm on board with it, mostly because the acting, writing, and filmmaking all come together and deliver the story in a satisfying way, and that's more important than whether or not it matches how I might have done it or wanted to see it done. But if you want to talk lore and mythos and tradition and, well, in-universe, making bad, self-centered decisions in moments of emotional distress and then paying for them in performative, self-immolating fashion is pretty much the Skywalker men brand, isn't it? Like, we've met 3 of these guys and they've all been perpetually immature, self-involved narcissists who are really susceptible to suggestion. For better or worse, old Luke and Kylo Ren, as we encounter them in the new trilogy, absolutely feel like authentic descendants of Mr. I Don't Like Sand. Actually, shit, here's a lore question I wouldn't mind an answer for, though. Does Luke know that the Skywalker Force-sensitive special bloodline only goes back 1 generation because his father was technically a homunculus genetically engineered through dark Force magic? Because it's starting to feel like that is information someone should have passed on to him at some point.
From a certain point of view,
Anyway, for what it's worth, it's also very much in line with the longer tradition of the mythic hero in literature and mythology, which is not to say it needs to be, but since every Star Wars nerd, myself included, has been all too eager to explain that Lucas deliberately drew from the Joseph Campbell Hero with a Thousand Faces cycle to set up the broad strokes of his mythos for the past 40 years, it's only fair to remind everyone that mythic heroes tend to come to bad and/or bittersweet ends more often than not. Recall that the specific mythological figure Luke Skywalker resembles most, largely by design, is King Arthur. You know, common boy, gets a special sword, meets a wizard, finds out he's of noble lineage. This isn't news to anyone, right? And, well, how did things end up for King Arthur again? He wins, he tries to build a new and better kingdom, he has a few good years, he gets arrogant, Camelot falls to ruin because of interscene family conflict, partly of his own damn fault, and he's eventually undone by a vindictive younger relative and has to be spirited away to an unreachable legendary island connected to the spiritual origins of his central mythology. Ahem.
Blow me to Bermuda!
Once again, I get not liking it, but this idea that it doesn't fit with the franchise or it doesn't make sense in the narrative, yeah, that's a lot harder to justify in my opinion. However, that having been acknowledged, I do think there's another level of resentment and rejection spinning out of this that's coming more from a place of misreading what people think the story is saying in the film. You see, a lot of the readings, amusingly both for and against The Last Jedi, frame the film as a kind of anti-nostalgia or anti-fandom treatise, mainly based around Kylo Ren's monologue about killing the past and Luke's insistence for most of his screen time that he's not joining the Resistance or using the Force anymore because he's determined to make sure the whole Jedi Sith Force user thing dies with him. And make no mistake, the idea of letting go of old ideas and embracing the new is very much built into the metatext of both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. For good or ill, the new trilogy is all in on the idea of its story as a meta-narrative about the new Disney-owned Lucasfilm inheriting Star Wars legacy and what that means, and The Last Jedi's overall arc seems to be very much about setting up the starting point of a major status quo shakeup, mainly based around taking the ability to use the Force out of the Jedi Order paradigm and reconstituting it as a skill set that can manifest anywhere unexpectedly, more like mutant powers in the X-Men universe or magic in Harry Potter. That's definitely what the final shot with the kid is about, and it feels like the logical place Disney would want to take the brand long term. It just frees up a lot of possibilities. It makes sense. But what I feel is happening as well is a lot of people are extrapolating out from this that The Last Jedi wants to erase everything that Star Wars used to be and shit all over the mythos in this specific case, somehow say that Luke was never great and that the Jedi suck in order to hold up the new paradigms and new characters as being superior. And I don't actually see that at all. In fact, I'd argue that the entire Rey and Luke story is really nothing less than a very deliberate, earnest, and sincere love letter to the idea of fandom and Star Wars fans in particular. And I'll explain why that is in the next episode, because this is getting a little on the long side, and because I'll be busy all next weekend at Boston's own Arisia Sci-Fi Convention, where I'll be hanging out on the floor and participating in several discussion panels, so if you're there, by all means please say hi. In any case, I won't be able to edit an episode this weekend, so cutting the script in half here makes sense for me. So we'll pick this back up in next week's episode. Hey gang, here's a question that keeps coming up. If your handle is moviebob, where are your movie reviews? Well, my old reviews are in a lot of places. You'll find many of them on my YouTube channel, but you'll find the brand new ones on Geek.com, an awesome site that's also your one-stop news source for science, TV, gaming, technology, nerd culture, the works. You can find all my reviews directly by going to geek.com/author/bchipman, because that's my real name, and you can get regular updates on all my reviews and all of Geek.com's other great content by signing up for their kick-ass newsletter at subscribe.geek.com. And don't forget to also subscribe to the Geek.com YouTube channel, where you'll find the videos that accompany my reviews and tons of other great content too. Remember, that's Geek.com, the Geek.com newsletter, and Geek.com on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss out on all the latest MovieBob reviews. You can also check out my own new website, MovieBob Central, where you'll find my blog, links to all my work, and shop for my books, ebooks, and future MovieBob products. And please remember to like these videos, share them with all of your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching another MovieBob production.